This is Swarfcast. I'm Noah Graff. I am very honored to have Jay Jacobs, parallel entrepreneur, co-founder and chairman of Paperless Parts, and host of the Job Shop Show podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Noah. Great to be here.
Well, this is so much fun because I was just on Jay's podcast, which is going to come out relatively soon, I think. And he is exactly in our same realm of machining. He has also a background in 3D printing, and we're going to get his story. And also, I think one topic I really want to cover today is pricing, because this is something I'm hearing about all the time. But first, let's give people some context about where you're coming from. I know that you had great success with a company called Rapid that you started from the ground up. Let's tell people who you are, and then we'll work into some other stuff.
Well, thank you, Noah. It's an honor to be on your podcast and appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and hopefully elicit some information, some content that will be of value to your listeners. I think I have a pretty unique perspective in the parts making world. I am a degreed mechanical engineer and I've never practiced. I went into sales and have done sales and marketing and business owner for pretty much my own whole career. And I started out in the OEM manufacturing environment, spherical bearings. I then worked for the job shop, the prototype shop, and back in 1989 at the shop, I bought my first 3D printer. So I've been involved with 3D printing since, that's 11, that's 30, 34, almost 35 years now.
How long have 3D printers even been around?
That was the second year that they were available. It was an SLA 250 from 3D Systems. And I think we were the 10th job shop in the country to have a 3D printer or stereolithography system as they were known back then. And, I switched gears and I sold CAD CAM software for 3 years, and I sold to product designers. My forte, though, was selling to shops, and I sold CAD Key, I sold SurfCam, and I sold a package that's no longer around called Euclid. I really clicked with the sheet metal shops, and in the Boston area, pretty much every shop when I got done had CAD Key in there, and quite a few machine shops. I went out and worked for a company making products, so I was actually buying parts for a while. And then I went to a startup, it was called back in 1996, a stereolithography service bureau. And we had two of the big stereolithography machines. These were the production machines back in the day, production prototypes. We
What are those? I'm not that
That's when
familiar
you
with them.
use the liquid and it's cured by UV light. And the materials have gotten so much better over the years. Back in 1989, it was an acrylic, and if you looked at it wrong, the parts broke. I think of super glue being layered up. 96, it was a lot more durable. We used it to create prototypes. We used it to create molds and patterns for metal casting in a variety of ways, urethane castings and
What
plastic.
industries was this going into?
Anybody making parts, anybody using metal castings, using plastic parts, injection molded parts, when you needed to get one, then maybe a dozen or so to take to a show. We worked with product developers before they went to production.
Okay.
And went out on my own in 99 and became a manufacturer's rep. Pretty much had been focused on plastics before, and I switched to more of the metals and selling metal castings, selling machine parts, selling sheet metal parts, really big springs. And what I discovered was that you could not use 3D printing to rapidly turn around a sheet metal part. And the product developers told me the longest lead time item for prototypes was sheet metal parts. I think I'm sort of a naturally born entrepreneur, and I wrote a business plan, raised some money from family and friends, and pretty much my life savings. um, Found a really, really small shop and started Rapid Sheet Metal 3 days after September 11th in 2001.
So you found did you say you found a shop or you founded a shop?
I bought a very small shop that had about
You bought it.
$150,000 in revenue. The owner was retiring for health issues, came with two people, and the office manager had been contract, so she left. Um, and the idea there, which was pretty radical back in 2001, was that we would use your 3D CAD data. You had to give us 3D CAD data to make your parts. If you gave us a print, it wasn't good enough. And this was really unusual. We were using SolidWorks to unfold the sheet metal part into a flat pattern, and that's why we needed it. The other things that we did that were outside the norm at the time for the sheet metal industry is we said we'd turn around your quote in 24 hours and make your parts in 1 to 2 weeks. And typically it took
And that's why you needed people to make it ahead of time
the,
for you, or do the CAD, do the CAD
yes,
ahead of time rather than just send you the the
yeah,
print.
because the machinery even back then really was driven from 3D CAD data, or at least a DXF that was easier to get from 3D CAD data. So if we didn't get it, we would have to recreate it. That took time. The possibility of errors in transposing the information.
That's really interesting that people weren't that everybody was expected to just go from the print, and you were basically outsourcing that, or and that was a. I mean, to me, it makes sense, but at the same time, it seems like um, you're making it a little harder for the customer. But that created really good turnaround
Was
time.
a
That was the
That
secret.
was the secret because the other sheet metal shops didn't want the 3D CAD data, and they were quoting it took them 1 to 2 weeks to get a quote, and then it might be 4 to 6 weeks or longer to get prototype parts. And that's if you were pushing them and pleading and all those sort of things. So the market was maybe small, but we were obviously a pretty small shop, and there were people who found us on the web, and we used the Google AdWords. Those were relatively new back then. And the the first 2 years were really tough. We were in that manufacturing recession, and I remember September of 2003, it was like somebody flipped a switch, and all of a sudden business started happening the way I had always anticipated it. And that's when we started growing. Yeah. The other thing that was different way back in the beginning is we said we would be happy to make quantity one. And other sheet metal shops absolutely hated doing that. And we were told there's no way that there's enough business doing quantity one to be viable. And we were laughed at.
People using machining, were they doing quantities of one back then?
The way that you got a prototype was pretty much you went to your production supplier and either twisted their arm or begged them, and the production shops would somehow squeeze it in for you when it worked for them. That was
Mm-hmm.
the business model.
Okay. But that's probably partly just because 3D printers, not as many people had 3D
Well, 3D
printers. So
printers cannot even today make sheet metal parts. The characteristics of sheet metal is such that it the metal from an additive standpoint will not act like a sheet metal part will. Plus, the parts tend to be larger, which isn't really cost effective for sheet metal. And what we ended up doing over the years is automating the process so much, which other shops have now duplicated, that you can turn sheet metal parts around using conventional technology very, very quickly and at a pretty inexpensive cost relative to even if the materials worked for 3D printing. So, so stampings and sheet metal fabrication, I don't see on the horizon to be done in any way by 3D printing. I took more of the methodology of the still lithography surface view or of the 3D printing and the mindset of that the customers want quantity one, they want it fast, and price a lot of times isn't an objective.
For those who aren't seeing the video, you have a plaque behind you that says "Be lazy" on it. You seem like the opposite of lazy. What's the story behind that?
I am like a squirrel, shiny objects, and it's a reminder that slow down and enjoy the ride. And, and it's okay
Okay.
to be lazy. Like,
Well, you told me when we prepared, and people know often we do preps for these, and you mentioned to me that the people who are the best people for coming up with processes are lazy people.
yes.
Um, I thought that was harkening back to that. What explain what you meant by that?
Well, it's not my idea. However, what it means is the lazy person is going to figure out the most efficient and fastest way to get something done so they can get back to being lazy.
As long as they're not a corner cutter
Yes.
who, you know,
Yes. So it's said in jest. Um, The intent is clear.
I thought it was a really, really profound thing. So okay, and then you built this.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit. You built this from 5 employees to 325
hmm
employees. How what? Tell me a little bit about the scaling process.
There's some critical points in the story. Uh, the first critical point was that I had to make a decision to delegate and let go of things. And I remember exactly when really it crystallized for me. And starting in the beginning, I was putting out most of the quotes. And in my mind, I put out these perfect quotes that anticipated everything the customer could think of. Uh, they were awesome. And as time went on, we had more and more inquiries because that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to be successful, wanted to grow, and the quoting volume got to be too much for me. So I, as a first step, had someone else in the engineering office help me set up quotes. And then even that got too much. So I said to them, please prepare these simple quotes. And I would teach them and critique them. And there was always something that wasn't in the quote to make it in Gay's mind, the perfect quote. And the volume kept increasing. We were growing, sometimes 50% a year. Yeah,
And you were worried about the quality
yeah.
now because you were going so fast
Well, but
and
I was
you weren't able to oversee
what
things.
our promise to our customers was we would get the quotes out in 24 hours or less. And there were times I literally would, young family, I would go home, have dinner, put the kids in bed, and then I'd go back to the shop and quote till midnight because I knew that if I didn't get those quotes out, that they would be there the next day and we weren't going to live up to that promise of getting the quotes out in 24 hours and the whole business model would blow up. And
So you were like the Domino's pizza fabricating, and you had to like live
yeah,
live up to that.
yeah, yeah, you don't want your pizza 4 hours later.
Well, no, I mean, but they
Yeah.
promised you got the free pizza if you didn't get it on
We weren't
time.
we weren't
So
giving the stuff
you
away for
were,
free, but yeah. So, but the point came, I said, you know what? We can't do this alone. I have to make a decision. We can essentially stay at the same revenue level and they can put out the perfect quote, or I can bring other people in. And as long as we are getting orders from customers and they are happy with the quotes that are coming out from other people, then I remember literally thinking, I got to turn my head. I can't look at how the sausage is made. And as long
Yeah.
as we're getting the business in, uh, and then I can focus on the things that other people can't do. And
I feel the same way, like with like this podcast, like the post production. I have an editor for it. I feel like the show notes, it drives me crazy. I keep trying to figure out how to automate, outsource, and do you think ego is part of the problem? Do you think just I don't know.
I,
I mean, it just seems like a very psychological thing. Part of it is, and part of it is it's just hard to find somebody that's good, right?
well, what I learned over time is that things that I thought I was good at, I was only okay at. And there were other people out there who were better at it than me. And then let's say that I wouldn't say anybody on my team was lazy, but they, the growth was relentless and they had to figure out ways to automate it, make it better. And they came up with solutions that I never would have dreamed of. Their creativity, because they were involved in the process, was unleashed. And that, but that was a critical moment where I had to let go and delegate and learn to delegate. Once I made that decision that I would delegate, that was very freeing. And then it's sort of funny as time went on, we kept growing and we had to hire more people. And I learned that one of the reasons, and this wasn't conscious in the beginning, but one of the reasons I really liked growing and growing fast was it meant I could hire more people so I could push off to them the things that I didn't really enjoy as much, and I could narrowing the focus on the things that I really liked. So that was a huge side benefit of growing, at least in my mind.
That's really interesting. I mean, was part of the letting go problem that there were a few things that you really liked
Well,
doing and you didn't want to let go of
I've
those
loved
things?
quoting. To me, it was I always wanted to put out. I think you want to talk about pricing sometime here. I always wanted to put out a price that was the highest price possible that someone would buy the parts for. Then, of course, we would make money. We had a floor that we had to be over, and it, it irked me when I would send out a quote and 5 minutes later I'd get a PO, went back in, I'd think, man, I could have asked for more money on that. And so um, I really that
So you needed to train the people to try to think
yeah, yeah,
like
we
you.
and that gets into part of the growth is I spend a lot of time training people, and that's what my role evolved into over time. I'll talk briefly about culture, and my role was to embed the culture in people, and that involved even when we were over 300 people, spending a lot of time on the floor in the offices, getting my philosophy and mindsets is into as many people as possible from a first-hand basis rather than it being passed on from person to person. And what I learned is that every company has a culture, whether you like it or not. And once you realize that you have a culture, then you can decide whether you like the culture you have. And if you don't, you can be deliberate and change it. And give you an example, one of the things that I would do, I started early on and then continued all the way through, is we had lunch with Jay for new team members. And I would go through, we talk about myself, my history, we talk about the company's history, and we talk about the core values. And then we would let them ask any questions that they wanted. And this was within a month of them joining the company. And the idea was they heard it directly from me. They knew that they had access to me. When I was walking around on the floor, they comfortable saying hello. And these are part of things that I felt were important for our culture that made Rapid who we were over time. And one of the things that I found is we were actually pretty innovative, which is not super common in manufacturing environment because a lot of times people get hit over the head when they make mistakes. And I actually would hit my managers over the head when they yelled at the individual contributors who made mistakes. And it's, it's not a failure unless you don't learn something. And as long as it's not going to blow up the company, the way that we were able to grow, we grew on an average rate of 32% from 2010 to 2017 every year. And everybody on the team had to contribute, bring the knowledge they had to the table to try to implement it. We did a lot with software. Um, that culture of innovation, if somebody gets yelled at or they're not taken seriously when they have ideas, then they won't bother anymore. Yeah. We had some people. It was not. It wasn't innovation. Wasn't delegated to a team. It was everyone within the company, and we really tried to promote that.
Do you think it's easier to delegate once you get to a certain amount of people than if, like, say you have 10 people? Is it harder to delegate than if you have 100 people or 50
I think
people?
it's a learned skill. Maybe some people do it naturally. It wasn't natural for me. I am not active in paperless parts on a day-to-day basis, so I don't have a team anymore outside of people who work with me in some other aspects. And so I have two people now, and I delegate a lot to them, way more probably than I did at Rapid.
But do you feel like, I mean, you had a co-founder with Paperless Parts, and I don't really know exactly your relationship, but do you feel like Rapid was more your
Oh yeah,
baby,
yeah.
and you came in with Paperless Parts more, I don't
Well,
know, a
so let's
mindset
let's
of,
let's
all right, I'm a business guy now,
no, no, no.
like,
It's this is a great example. So my co-founder, there were five of us originally at Paperless Parts. Jason Ray is the CEO, and he runs the company. Paperless Parts is his baby. I look at it as my job is to support him. And so if you want to say that I'm delegating that, I don't look at it like that. I look at it as it's his baby, and the being okay with not being involved in all the aspects, that's something that from the beginning, I was more involved in the beginning. And as time went on, Jason has way surpassed my expectations. He's an incredible entrepreneur, founder, team builder.
was that your plan though when you came in, that you were going to be sort of hands-on at the beginning and then go lay off?
I didn't know, and I don't think I don't think anyone knew the exact force that was probably my hope, and it's turned out incredibly well. And again, Jason is just making such a huge dent in the manufacturing world with what he's done to build a
Right.
team.
And we'll have to go over that soon. I'm just, I, working in a very small family business that's, you know, I think over time, we probably could have made a lot more money if we had scaled. But scaling in the used machinery business is a lot different than, I mean, I know people will say, "Oh, you think you're different," like, but uh, the way a lot of dealers they scale by hiring um, a lot of salespeople, and then they work straight on commission, and uh, it's more hands off. And but it's, I don't know. I feel like with my dad, who's he's the sole owner, he's he's too fascinated by the actual day to day. I mean, he doesn't. I don't think he loves the actual management part. So he wants to be a treasure hunter, and so you run into, I suppose, if you and it's interesting. I see a lot of dealers who they have a bunch of people working for them, yet the owner still wants to dip his or her finger into the treasure hunting, and that may, I don't know if that's for better or worse. I think they probably dip their finger in the most lucrative, the bigger stuff. um but I don't know, I just I find the concept of scaling and uh letting go, I find it fascinating, I find it scary, I find it something that I'm not in touch with. At the same time, I love the idea of like letting go and having a team do the stuff that doesn't exhilarate you, or and then working with the team and then they exhilarate you, working together. I'm not saying we don't have a team. We do have a team at Graff-Pinkert, as far as people in the shop, as far as people in the office. We're not doing a lot of the BS. They're doing a great job doing a lot of details and stuff that I absolutely couldn't do. But as far as selling, um, and deals and stuff, like, I think it's partly ego, it's partly we're just not interested in delegating, I don't know. And I wonder, is it a different business than yours, or maybe that's just an excuse, and your you're letting go to scale isn't that much different. What do you I mean, you only have a small view into it, but
So everybody goes into business. I coach startup entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, and
oh, okay.
I think it's important to understand why you're in business. And for me, I had so much energy about growing the company, seeing seeing inefficiencies and making them inefficient, and doing something that had never been done before. For yourself, it's why what juices you every day? What gets you out of bed? And what things do you dread and you push off and procrastinate? And there's no there's no right or wrong in terms of staying sort of the size that you are, doing it the way that you're doing, or saying we want to be the biggest machinery dealer in the country or in the world, and that will allow me to focus on the things that I like to do. Everybody's journey is different, everybody's reasons for doing it, and at the end of the day, where do you want to be? Do you want to pass it on to your children as your father and grandfather did? Uh, do you want to create a legacy uh, in your world that you hope when your business uh, leaves you is still continued? There's so many aspects of it, and it actually gets into something that I mentioned to you, the shop operating system, which I created. Yeah, one of the other important things in the growth of Rapid was putting in a structure in place for my team because I hate structure
Yes.
and I hate management. Um,
Okay, so you hate management too. You like being in the trenches and doing the hands-on and
I liked being at 30,000 feet, and then I liked being at 5 feet. I didn't like being in between. And that's what I consider, I guess, management in many ways. Um, so putting the structure in place that allowed me to pass on in a formal way to my team how we should operate the company, and then gave me the freedoms to do what I wanted to do.
yeah, and then have a much more successful company at the same
Well,
time
again,
too. Not that scaling always
yeah, but
leads it, but
success is it's all relative, and revenue and profitability are one metric of success. They they shouldn't necessarily be what everybody's striving for. There, there are a lot of other aspects, and it, it might be for somebody who's listening. They want to work 30 hours a week. They want to coach their children's after school sports activities. They want to be around every weekend and never answer an email or it, and they're going to forego growth, maybe even profitability, as long as they can make a good living for their family and do the things that they want for their family.
True, but if you were able to then scale it, um, then that might. And there's another guy I love. I interviewed him. His name is Ari Meisel. You ever
Yeah,
heard of him?
yeah,
I don't know. He wrote a
I
book
know
called
Ari.
Less Doing. Okay, so I mean, I'd say the dream is you scale, and then you have time to
Well,
coach.
isn't that that's what gets hard because once you have success scaling, when do you stop? And when do you say, all right, now I'm going to go from 60 hours a week, which is what it took to scale, to 30 hours a week? That's really hard to do. And I struggled with it. I forced myself, and I'm glad I did, to get out of work early some afternoons to pick up my kids at school and do things with them, maybe take them out for ice cream right afterwards. It, it still felt uncomfortable. It felt like I was cheating and I should be working and everybody at the company is working. And that's that's a mindset and over time, and particularly now when I look back, is I wish I'd done more of that. And that if we'd only grown 30% a year instead of 32% a year, things still would have been pretty good. And I could have been satisfied. But
My question is, could you have, the 30 and the 60 and or 40 and 60? In the end, it's a bit arbitrary when if you really take a step back. The question is, could you have still grown 32% if you had been hands off, the same amount, and just had the people working under you? You see it. You were in there, so maybe you see it in a different way. I'm just curious.
started Rapid in 2001. We sold in 2017. And I would still go in the office pretty much every day, 2016, 2017. The reality is, I was making work for myself in a lot of cases. I had such a great team. We had clear objectives and directions, and it was a failure on my part to not stop and step back and say, you know what, I've accomplished in business what I've accomplished, and what else do I want to be spending my time on? It's
How old are
I'm
you?
59. It's really hard once you get, yeah, it's really hard to, once you're in that groove, to stop. And work could be one thing. It could be you're a marathon runner and you're always going to put in the time to get in the miles. There's also a lot of identity with, particularly with work, with what you do. All these things. It's what I talk to the younger entrepreneurs is, as you're starting out, what does success look like for you? If we're sitting down 5 years from now, what has had to happen for you to feel like you've been successful? And it's everybody should have their own metrics, their own definition of what that success is. And I would ask if they would say X amount of revenue and say, why? Why is that important?
Do you feel that's how you were? You you gave yourself a metric, and now are you looking back and going,
I
"Oh, that was arbitrary"?
The results were more confirmation of what we were doing. It I really, really enjoyed creating the company and doing something that had never been done before, implementing ways of manufacturing parts that were totally different. The team building software. We had 6 software developers on staff. You know, how many parts making companies have 6 software developers, let alone one? We we created such amazing shop software, estimating software that integrated all the aspects of the business. And that was, it was really cool to see how we could become more and more efficient. And I mean, we could turn a part around in 24 hours without a hiccup in the stock, without doing anything special.
So, so do you feel like you were? It seems like you're quite cerebral and you're into like mastermind stuff. And do you feel like at the time you were conscious of? It seems like now you really appreciate the journey, and the journey. You understand that the journey was where it was at. At the time, did you go, "This is the journey. I'm really enjoying this journey," or were you kind of had like the vision of, "I want to get at X, and this is what I'm going for."
It was the rush along the way, and the it was really hard to sell the company. I had an offer, a silly offer from a public company who could afford to pay what they did, and I had to really think about, is this, did I want to continue? Because where we were at Rapid, there was still
Had you had it on the market, or did you
no,
just kind of get an
no, we didn't
offer?
have it on the market. We had a partnership. We developed a
Interesting.
partnership with Proto Labs, and they did not have the turn sheet metal service. So they,
Okay, so it was somebody you knew. You had a
yeah,
partnership
yes,
with them.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And there was a lot of me thinking about my identity, and I, I really, really enjoyed the company building process. I loved working with the people. We had such a great team at Rapid, and I knew that that door was going to close if I sold the company. So it was a very conscious decision, and I said, there's other things I want to do in my life, and some of them I don't even know what they are yet. However, I have
And how old were you when you sold it?
53.
Wow, that's only 10 years older than me. Um, so, look, this is something I'm starting to. We're in the baby stages of doing this, and I'm very into psychology of this kind of thing. Um, the money came in, and the money was just so attractive. Um, had there been no offer, uh, do you think you'd still be doing it now? And how do you think you'd be feeling? And if you absolutely can't answer that hypothetical question, it's okay.
I'm pretty sure I would still be doing it. However, my regret is that I know Paperless Parts would not have had the success that it has had. We we were involved in the prototype parts world, and my viewpoint on manufacturing was from that perspective. And what Jason and the team have done is taken, and the background of Paperless Parts is,
Yeah, we have to back up for 1 second now
yeah,
because everybody's going to be like, "What's?" Well, not everybody, but give me paperless parts in a
sure.
nutshell. It's related to the quoting.
Yeah, so as part of our automation and to turn around quotes really fast at Rapid, there were so many pieces internally that allowed us to do that. And then we also took it to the point where we created a plugin for SolidWorks that would instantly quote your sheet metal parts and accept an order. And at the end, I think it was something like 20% of our sheet metal revenue and maybe 20% of the parts, 10% of the dollars, real rough, came in automatically as orders from the SolidWorks app. It was amazing. We were really, really good at estimating parts fast. And what we did is we interrogated the 3D model and pre-populated and used algorithms to take a lot of the work out of the process for the estimator. And there were a lot of other things where we extracted information from emails. We, bottom line, could get a lot more quotes out of every estimator, and they could be turned around a lot faster. And in 2016, started talking with Jason. He brought on our CTO, Scott Sawyer, and we had the inklings of what paperless parts would become, which was based around the estimating tools that Rapid. And as the sale started to take place in 2017, um, that software was locked up at Rapid. So Paperless Parts set about to recreate an estimating tool that cloud-based that would be available for the masses. And
Did you have to kind of work
oh,
that out, like delicately about intellectual
it
property,
wasn't very
etc.?
delicate. There was there was a lot of back and forth on stuff like that. But the bottom,
Mm-hmm. Because that was part of your secret sauce.
yes, but it was a small part. It was really the parts making that they were interested in. They weren't excited though about paperless parts starting, and that was a battle I had to go through personally with Photo Labs. Um, Paperless Parts though recreated an estimating tool from scratch, cloud-based, and it we had some false starts. We finally clicked, found our product fit, our basic product fit with the shops, and we're focused on providing estimating and communication tools now for the machining and sheet metal industries primarily. I think we've got over 500 shops using our software right now, and quite a few large, what we call enterprise shops, and shops 50 over 50 million in revenue, over 100 million in revenue. It's the core.
So it seems like this journey, you're all about the journey. And I think it sounds like you're really happy about this journey, but you think you'd still have
Well,
been,
what I would have done
um,
is I would have
just,
not allowed the team. I would have probably meddled too much. I wouldn't have delegated, and I would have tried to have been too smart. And
no, I mean, had you stayed with the
well,
company
that's what I mean.
longer.
If I still owned Rapid, then I would have pushed paperless parts to more serve when I saw the functionality of a company like Rapid needed, as opposed to the more general functionality of who our customer base is today. I would have been said, no, we don't. You don't want to do this. You want to do that, and uh, yeah. And I'm glad I'm glad I sold Rapid. It's allowed paperless parts to flourish. I think we're really helping American manufacturers, parts makers solve a problem that is so hard for most shops, which is turning around quotes quickly and getting people who are less experienced able to contribute to the quoting process. And then we're also putting in some really cool communication tools and some other stuff that have a lot of value to the shops.
Interesting. So it sounds like it's given you some new purpose, but you had purpose before. But so and it sounds like it was a bit, it was a transition and it took a little soul searching to sell it. Um, what, I'm sure there was a number where if they offered you something paltry or that you was just okay, uh, you, then you might not have accepted it. Um, I don't know. It sounded like you just said, "Oh, they offered me a price that you couldn't refuse." But it also had to do with where you were.
So there were some uh, 3D Systems at the time was buying the stereolithography service bureaus that were in the prototype world, both 3D printing and other uh, processes that were run by shops. There were some crazy multiples that were being bought at, and so I put a number out to Proto Labs and basically said, "This is it," and figure out how to justify it. And
Can you tell me what multiple it was?
it ended up being. probably roughly 2.5x sales and about 10 times EBITDA.
10
Maybe
times
10,
EBITDA.
10, 10 or 10 or
Explain
12.
explain that to people. Explain that the EBITDA to people. What exactly you
Sure.
mean by that?
So EBITDA is your earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Um, sort of non-cash flow items in a lot of cases. And it's a rough way of calculating how much money you're making in the company. And we, one of the things I was proud of, and that was the, something I would not budge from, is we early on we demonstrated we could make 20% plus EBITDA. And the only time that we didn't do that in the later years is when I sort of lost my way and I focused on revenue. And after that, we I said I would rather not grow 20% EBITDA. So if you had $10 million in revenue, your EBITDA was 2 million. I'd rather not grow and keep the EBITDA there than to grow and have, say, a 15% or a 10% EBITDA. The What I learned the hard way is profitability drives the growth. If you don't have the cash from the higher EBITDA, then your growth is going to stall. So they really go hand in hand.
So you were saying, maybe I didn't totally understand. You were saying you were growing
Mhm.
super fast and you decided to slow down your
No, I was trying
growth.
to accelerate this.
You were trying to get
No,
the EBITDA
I was
to
trying
go
to
up.
accelerate the revenue. You know, I was focused on solely on the revenue, and that made people, I incentivized people to make bad decisions to generate revenue that wasn't
Ah,
necessarily profitable. Take job.
sounds like a lot of publicly traded companies. They want to show growth, so they build more stores and they,
Yeah.
you
So
know,
learn the hard way. Don't chase
10
revenue.
time 10 to 12 times. But the reason you sold for so much was because you had your own secret sauce. You had the software, you were doing something that nobody else was doing.
We were
Category
the
of one.
world's leader in turning around prototype sheet metal parts by far. There was no one close to us, and I believe Proto Labs looked at trying to create it from scratch in-house, and that was something they recognized would have been really, really hard to do, probably impossible. And one of the things with public companies, there's a term called the PE ratio, and basically the price and the the earnings time the price. They bought us at, let's say, 12 times EBITDA, and they were being traded at 30 times EBITDA at least. They were at a really high PE ratio. So by adding our revenue, even at a high multiple in our industry, the market cap for them went up because they now had all this extra revenue and profit. It was valued much higher.
As Chris Voss would cringe at, it was a win-win.
It really was. It really was.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just for people's reference out there, a normal, when machining companies sell, it's, generally from
Right?
3 to 5, three
Yeah.
to six. Um, Once in a while, people come in and they say, I want 7 or whatever. And you basically just tell them
Hmm.
they're crazy, uh, unless they have a product, you know, or something like this. So, yeah, I could see how that would be just incredibly attractive.